4, follow traffic, clear visual approach, runway 4 right, maintain 17, John Austin, 5 mile final. Alright, 17 till 5 out.
Can schedulers and dispatchers provide the same high level of service to their flight operation when working remotely? From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan, sponsored by Aviation. I'm Rob Finfrock with your trusted source for the very latest business aviation news and information. The COVID-19 pandemic flipped the script on what used to be the traditional work environment. And even though social distancing is no longer the norm, many industries have nevertheless adapted to employees working from home instead of commuting to an office. And that includes business aviation and particularly for schedulers and dispatchers. Working remotely isn't an entirely new concept for them, though. Jen Perez is the senior corporate aircraft scheduler for Schweitzer Engineering.
I've been with our aviation department just about 12 years. The past 7 years, I have been working fully remote. And prior to that, I guess my first 5 years with the department, I was in the office. And we were actually located in our headquarters building. We were not at the hangar. So it was a good submersion into the company culture, I guess, to kind of kick it all off.
That said, many schedulers do still work from their company's offices or hangars. That includes nationwide flight coordinator Diane Bassetti.
Really what I've found that works for me is best is being in the office. I really appreciate the flexibility to work remotely from time to time, but again, being in the office works best for me. I really appreciate my office space and the ability to actually disconnect from life at home when I'm in the office. And I also value my team, and I feel just what works for me, again, it may not work for other people, but is being able to walk 10 steps down the hallway to someone else's office to get together rather than being on a Teams call.
And then there's a third option, the hybrid work model, with schedulers splitting their time between performing their tasks remotely and occasionally going into the office. Cody Bjork is a flight support manager for Clay Lacy Aviation.
I've been hybrid for about a year now. Before that, I was completely remote. Some of the pros that I find, and I feel like these could go really either way. Like a pro could also be a con. You have the flexibility of a little bit more work-life balance. And that seems to be very helpful for a lot of people, especially with people with kids. But also at the same time, you might have isolation because like Diane was saying, you can't just walk down the hall, 10 steps and go see a coworker or bounce ideas off of each other. And also if there's less distraction at home for some people, but for some people there might be more. I think the one that everyone appreciates the most is that there's no commute. For me, I live about an hour and a half from our office. And so it usually makes for a long day when I have to drive into the office. But it really makes those times going to the office more worthwhile. And those are the times that I go and meet our clients or go and meet the crews when I have a departure that day. I think for us, the pros outweigh the cons, but it definitely depends on the type of worker you are.
Cody, in addition to occasionally working remotely yourself, you also oversee a team that includes hybrid workers. Tell us about that.
I currently manage a team of 3. Coming on to a 4th person here shortly. Beyond myself, there's 2 other flight support managers, and we all have a team of 3 to 5 people, and everyone is bounced off all across the country. So my team specifically, I have some people in the Pacific Northwest, I have someone in the New York area, and I have someone who's also in Southern California, but a little bit farther away from the LA office, and they're all almost completely 100% remote. And there definitely are some challenges with that. It's not everyone's not in the same room. It's a little bit harder to develop relationships when everyone is remote. But we kind of get around that where we have weekly meetings. We're always talking to each other on a text thread, on our phones, or through WhatsApp or through Teams. We just keep everyone up to date as needed. Then we have a couple weekly meetings where we all get together and talk about any pain points or any wins that we might have. Then every so often, we try to get everyone all in the same building at least once a year, and we try to get them all so we could all go break bread, as they say, go have dinner, or just work in the office together.
More of our conversation in a moment, following this word from our sponsor.
Take your aviation operations to new heights. Introducing Varion, formerly known as ATP, your ultimate partner in achieving maximum aircraft uptime. At Varion, we understand the challenges faced by everyone in aviation. Our industry-leading technology solutions revolutionize aircraft management, so there's no more waiting, no more wondering, and no more wasted effort. Get real-time visibility of your maintenance, inventory, operations, and regulatory data right at your fingertips with an easy-to-use system, backed by a team of experts with deep aviation knowledge offering 24/7, 365 support. After 50 years in the business, we have built a growing reputation for getting our customers more aircraft uptime. That's why thousands of aircraft operators worldwide have already discovered the power of Varion. Say goodbye to downtime and hello to increased efficiency and profitability. Visit Varion.com to learn more. Varion, let's get you more uptime.
We're back now with Jen Perez, Diane Bassetti, and Cody Bjork, and our discussion about the remote and hybrid work model for schedulers and dispatchers working in business aviation. Cody, you were telling us about managing other remote and hybrid workers. Are there any particular challenges associated with that?
You almost get the tendency to micromanage because you don't have the people there in front of you where you can listen and they're not there to help out. So like if you see something that might not be getting completed quickly, you don't have the eyesight that they're not in the office. But so you might check in on them more regularly, but that's something that as a manager you have to really be mindful of. But also not everyone is built to work remote, and some people do thrive better when they're at the office.
Jen, what are your thoughts on the kind of management style and even the kind of employee needed to make remote work, well, work?
Probably the number one focus would be prioritizing the type of work ethic above like the total technical knowledge, let's say. So even if it's a newer employee that doesn't have all of the technical knowledge, knowing, are they trainable? Are they motivated? Are they eager to learn, and are they a problem solver? Are they going to be dedicated while they're working remotely when they don't have necessarily the physical accountability pieces right there? So, are they accountable, self-aware? Can and will they identify and come forward if they make a mistake? Because a lot of the aviation world is you can't just read a book and know everything. You learn through experiences, you learn through mistakes. And when you're on your own, can you identify those? And when you do, are you willing to step up? I know there's been many times throughout the years where I've called my manager, and you really have to be pretty humble. Call and say, I think I messed up. This is what I did. Knowing what I know now, I should have done X different. Here is my proposal to solve this. Do you agree? So I think just the overall work ethic to be able to work remotely, there is a benefit to if somebody doesn't feel that they're able to, be dedicated to that, then that's a conversation that management needs to have. And everybody needs to be honest with each other. I was fortunate to be able to get to know my manager very well for a good 5 years before I went remote. So she knew me very well. She knew the kind of worker I was. She had a deep level of trust in me. In those first couple of years, there definitely are benefits to being around others while you're learning. You learn how to troubleshoot kind of through osmosis. You learn how to identify those potential red flags. So maybe you didn't experience something on a trip, but down the road, something will happen and you'll say, hey, I remember Joe ran into something similar. There's a potential red flag here. Let me go check in. So there definitely are some things that you can't replicate working remotely, but having that foundation and just really clearly identifying the expectations for everybody ahead of time is key.
Diane, what are your thoughts?
Cody, I love the fact that you talk about breaking bread in person and celebrating wins. There are some things that I feel you just cannot do when not in person, and those are great options. Like you can have your happy hour on Zoom, and you're missing something, but really, I'm a people person, so being together, that's also another reason why I really appreciate being in the office. And Jen, you talked about the fact that you have already laid that foundation with your manager and maybe other employees as well. And I think that's really important, and that works for you. And I agree wholeheartedly. Having that foundation And that mindset, like, hey, I've really got to prioritize my day, is important to me. One thing that I struggled with at the height of the pandemic and being at home, I actually found it really hard to disconnect from work. So while my computer was 10 feet away and you'd be like, oh, let me just go respond to this email, it really then was an hour later because it was just so easy. And frankly, there wasn't a whole lot else going on. And so I delved right into work. And I feel like now that I have my normal work schedule, and yes, I'm going to go answer an email later on, but I have the ability to better disconnect now that I'm in the office full time.
That's a great point about the need to disconnect, Diane, and one I still have a tough time with sometimes, even though I've worked from home for more than a decade now.
Right. And while we all know that aviation is essentially 24/7, for me, I found it really hard to disconnect before when at home. But now that I have a schedule that I've become accustomed to, 8 to 4:30 is my time on, and responding to an email at night is a lot easier for me now than it was 4 years ago because I don't get as consumed. We all know there's a time and a place when you're like, hey, I've got to work on this schedule for tomorrow because weather has settled in at your destination. But for me, it's a lot easier to have that work-life balance.
Diane, from your perspective, what situations are still better suited perhaps to having a scheduler on site and ready to respond versus someone working remotely?
We had a maintenance issue maybe 4 weeks ago. Passengers were here. We have 2 aircraft, and one of the aircraft was out of service suddenly. And I found myself in our conference room with our CEO and chairman of the board and my manager. And we were able to really collaborate in person. Had I not been here, it just wouldn't have happened. I really pride myself, and I'm sure Jen and Cody and the other schedulers and dispatchers in the industry will agree that we really pride ourselves on providing excellent customer service. And for me, that means being here for departures and arrivals, greeting passengers in the lobby. And if I'm not here, it doesn't happen. I really appreciate the face-to-face interactions with our customers and building that relationship. So whether good or bad an instance comes up, they know my face, they know my work history, they know what our department is built on. And again, that's customer service and safety. That in those tough times, it kind of pulls it all together.
Cody, I know that providing a high level of customer service is a priority for both you and for Jen as well, even as you both work away from the office. So how can a scheduler working remotely provide that same high level of service and exceed their customers' expectations?
I always like to say that airplanes are, in our role, are really such a small part of what we actually do, and customer service, like we're really just CSRs, right? Like airplanes is just the end goal, but everything that we do is customer service. And I find when I'm working with an EA or even like a pilot, like we consider the pilots also our customers at Clay Lacy. And it's very much you want to over communicate. You want to build that relationship as much as you can. You want to have the phone call or the Teams call with the camera on over just a text message. And you really want to develop that relationship in that way. And, there's definitely times where throughout the course of the year where we have the opportunity to meet the people that we work with, especially the crews when they go out. For me, I try to make a cohesive effort whenever I have an aircraft departing. I try to be there on the departure time. So like I might shift my hybrid days a little bit because hey, I haven't seen this crew in a while. I'm going to meet them. Or this is a really VIP client. I want to make sure that I'm there on site when things go well. Now, you can do these things remote, and there definitely are scenarios where I could do things better remotely as well as if I was there in person. And I think 90% of the time, 95% of the time, we can do just as well being remote as long as we are communicating. And I think communicating is key.
I think having a strong and supportive team is really essential here. And our team is kind of unique in that I think I was remote for about 3 or 4 years before some of our most frequent travelers even realized that we were not all sitting in the same room together. So our scheduling team, when I was on site, we actually sat in the headquarters building. We were not at the hangar. And so there were some perks to that. We were submerged with our customers, with our frequent travelers and our executives. But then there was also a lot of employees that were living elsewhere. We've got a lot of field offices throughout the US, throughout the world. So the majority of the people we're talking to are not even in the same town as us. Our pilots, the way that we fly, they're on the road quite often. So a lot of their arrivals and departures are at places away from home. So we really have been challenged, throughout the years to maintain that customer focus, maintain that customer service and those top-notch communication no matter where anybody's at. It feels like a great success, and I owe it all to my manager because she has established this team of schedulers and she's allowed us to all grow, and we all contribute and we all communicate regardless of where we at. I'm fully remote. One of my colleagues, another scheduler, is hybrid, and then we've got two in the office. When anything happens, anything big, anything like JIT happens, the very first thing is everybody gets on a phone call. And I really think it's actually strengthened our overall teamwork. We had a pop-up, I think it was 11:30 at night, something like that. So nobody's in the office actually at that time. Everybody's at home. And so I guess in a sense, we're all remote. We've got our maintenance tech on the phone. We've got a couple schedulers on the phone, our pilots, and we're all troubleshooting together. We identify a lead and that lead is delegating. And so those kinds of situations, while it's odd and it doesn't sound ideal, those are some of the most successful feeling times working as a team and really executing with clear communication, with that customer focus. And our customers are so delighted.
Jen, picking up on what Diane mentioned earlier about the other side of that coin in a sense, being able to separate work time from home time. How have you managed that?
I remember the years of when I did work in the office and we would have something pop up in the middle of the night on the weekend. And when I was working from a little laptop, that's really hard to be efficient and to do the best that I can in as quickly as I can. So I would find myself dropping everything and going into the office in the middle of the night. So nowadays, it's nice. Within a matter of a minute, I can go upstairs in my house and have my entire command center set up the way I have it set up. And what I do think is important is to have a separate work area if you are working remote. So I have a specific area of the house that I'm only in this location while I'm at work. So for me, for my mental health, which is very important working remotely as well as no matter where you're at, but in the remote model, I have to separate it. So while I'm at home, I don't want to feel like I'm at work. And while I'm at work, I don't want to feel like I'm at home. Both provide distractions. So if I'm home, I want to be fully locked in. So the area that I work in, I literally walk up the stairs and I go into this room and I shut the door. And the only time I do that is when I am going to work.
Great advice for anyone working remotely, Jen. What other tips would you share with companies or colleagues who may be looking to move to a remote or hybrid work model?
With the right person and the right work ethic, it can truly enhance productivity and the overall work-life balance. When I first moved to working remote, my productivity went up actually. I was able to take on more tasks because I had less distractions. All of the communications were kind of funneled into me as opposed to coming at me from multiple directions. Sometimes in the office, you'll be on the phone and somebody walks up and is talking to you, not realizing you're on the phone. Or, you're in the stages of a trip where you really have to focus and block everything out for a good 30 minutes. And you're in the middle of that, your phone rings. Being remote, you can put it on mute for a little while. But when you're in the office, people are walking up to you. There's other stuff, other side conversations happening that do distract. So I actually found, and I remember my manager checking in after I had been remote, she's like, "Are you okay? You have a lot on your plate." I'm like, "No, actually, I'm really good. What else can I help with?" So I actually noticed my productivity go up, but Again, it just really solely depends on the person. Can they be dedicated to that? Can they set those boundaries? I do go into the office a couple times a year. Taking advantage of that when you can just helps with the overall feeling of not feeling so isolated as a remote worker. I'm very much a people person, so that was an adjustment for myself when I first went remotely. I had to set personal boundaries. I realized that all of a sudden I sat down at my desk to go through my emails at 6:30 in the morning with a cup of coffee. All of a sudden it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I hadn't eaten breakfast. I hadn't eaten lunch. I was still wearing whatever I was wearing at 6:30 in the morning. So you have to have personal boundaries as well for your own mental health.
Diane, Jen mentioned a couple of excellent points, I think, particularly about how replicating a professional environment at home can serve to maintain a consistently high level of service to the company and to their customers.
Oh, absolutely. The whole time she was speaking, I'm over here nodding my head, correct. And maybe that is honestly one of the reasons why even just those one-off days when I'm at home, I'm always like, man, I wish I was in the office. It's ergonomics, it's phones, it's audio, it's all of that that I think helps play a huge role no matter what your setup is, really making sure you're set up to succeed and accomplish all those things that we all need to do in our daily work schedule. One last point that I would like to add is that clearly throughout this podcast, you've heard what works for Jen and what works for Cody and what works for me. The biggest thing is just what works for your company and what works for your leader and what you've agreed upon. Those are really the biggest things, right? We've found that there's this happy combination, but what works for some may not work for others. So speaking with your leader and finding what works is my suggestion.
Indeed. And as you've all noted throughout this podcast, Cody, it really comes down to communication.
Communicate, communicate, communicate. We have what is called an OCC. It's the Operational Control Center. We have an OCC call whenever there is a client impact, and we all get together and we solve it. And that happens whether we have people in the office or we have people remote. We have director of flight support. We might have our manager of flight operations and maybe a flight scheduler all in there, and we are all communicating and we are all trying to get whatever problem that we are dealing with, we try to get it solved. It's just that constant communication and making sure that the communication chain remains unbroken.
For additional information about remote or hybrid scheduling, check out the article on the subject from the January-February 2024 issue of NBAA's Business Aviation Insider magazine. You can find that article and other tips for schedulers and dispatchers at nbaa.org/scheduling. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Remember, you can subscribe to all Flight Plan episodes at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts, including by asking your virtual assistant or connected device. Of course, you can also download Flight Plan directly from nbaa.org. I'm Rob Finfrock. Thanks for listening, and join us next time for a new episode of Flight Plan.
Flight base, sending out 3500.
We got him inside. We're still on 170.